We reached Busan just as yellow dust rolled in from the west, turning the harbor cranes to skeletons dredged from a silted grave. Soyeon's Halmione insisted on feeding us juk and tangerines before we left, then pressed a talisman into her granddaughter's palm, a triangle of red thread knotted 9 times. "For fox tricks," she said. "Jangsan sings tonight." Her voice had the assurance of someone who'd outlasted explanations. Miho laughed, a polite puff that died at the window. Jay checked the route again. I recorded a few lines of ambience: the elevator chime, the stove clicking, the rustle of a curtain. Sound anchors you to the ordinary. I like to carry a pocketful of it whenever a story might wander. Jangsan rises sudden from the city, an island mountain hemmed by expressways and apartment blocks printed in beige. Its slopes hold hiking paths and relic bunkers, the mouths of tunnels, rusted fences, square pillboxes like brick teeth. The local legend says something white lives there, something that imitates human voices to lure you off the trail. They call it the Jangsanbeom, the Jangsan tiger, although no tigers remain. A mimic. A rumor that becomes a path through trees. I pitched the piece to my editor as folklore meets city edge, a way to write about how fear adapts in a wired place, and why a handful of hikers had gone missing near a mountain that overlooks convenience stores and neon. We started late to avoid crowds. Spring leaned cold, azaleas were shy, bursts of pink like cautions. Soyeon led, small and fierce, backpack straps frayed from grad school fieldwork. "Foxes don't do the voice," she said. "People do, or wind on power lines. But places keep the shape of a fear. That's what we study." "What about the missing hikers?" I asked. "People get lost," Jay said. "Phones die. Weather turns. Ordinary mistakes stack into tragedy faster than you think." Miho adjusted the battered Nikon he loved like a pet. Earlier he'd half-joked that tragedy photographs well, then apologized. He wasn't cruel. He was honest about what keeps a newsroom's lights on. At the second junction, a ribbon of white fabric fluttered from a branch. Hikers' tie markers, but this was different, wider than a sash, cut from something synthetic, faintly luminous with dust. Jay tugged it down. The edge was frayed by a blade. Miho photographed it against the sky. Soyeon's mouth pressed thin. Evening thinned the light to an underwater blue. The city spilled its glitter west, and the mountain grew its own weather. A wind rose from the sea, brine and frying oil turning to pine resin and cold iron. Our breath plumed. We passed a bunker door half buried in leaves, the handle wired shut. Someone had chalked a circle on the concrete with 9 short lines radiating outward, like the talismans not redrawn by a child. "Someone wants people to turn back," Jay said. "Or someone wants people to come looking," Soyeon answered. We reached a ridge where the trees stepped aside. Houndy's curve, the bridge strung with lights, freighters blinking on the black. Miho set his tripod. I placed the recorder on a flat rock, headphones hissing like static while I checked levels. Street sounds fell away. In their place came dry clicking, quick as pebbles tossed on metal. Then a voice, like a woman calling from a stairwell 3 buildings over, thin and patient. "Yogio." I swallowed. "Do you hear that?" "It's nothing," Jay said, but his hand tightened on the trekking pole. "It's a test," Soyeon murmured. "It matches your breath. It wants you to answer." We didn't. The clicking stopped. Wind smoothed the trees as if a hand stroked fur. Down the slope something moved with a hush of cloth through needles. Miho lifted his camera and froze. The shutter clicked twice. He lowered it without another shot, as though taking one more would make a pact he didn't want to sign. Somewhere behind us, metal tapped rock, the quick clink of hook on railing. From the city below, an ambulance keened and dipped. In my headphones the siren became breath, a whisper threading the pines. Not a word, only the shape of one. I told myself it was a gate in the wind. I told myself a lot as the ridge darkened to ink. We moved higher, trading the city's night for the mountains. The paved path gave way to stone steps. Frost still lived in the cracks. In the beam of Jay's headlamp, pine trunks crowded like black pillars. Something bright winked in the needles, then another like wet eyes. When we drew close, the reflections became bits of broken glass set into a low snare fence. The wire bit my glove when I brushed it. Jay cursed softly and knelt. "Poacher's work," he said. "Motsutoke season isn't for months, but people lay lines early. Traps push animals toward dead ground. Or push people," Soyeon said. "A human snare is still a snare." We found more signs. A rectangle of flattened duff under a tarp we couldn't see, boot prints overlapping like fish scales, a small pile of smooth stones stacked shoulder high at the bend of a trail where nobody would stack stones for luck. Miho photographed everything with clinical care. He'd stopped speaking. I knew that quiet, the listening before a photo that counts. At a fork, I heard it again, clicking, then a call that wasn't quite language. "Yogio," it breathed, a syllable drawn thin as string. It wasn't a fox's bark or a deer's whine. If it was human, the speaker had practice. It settled into a rhythm that matched our footfalls, like someone walking behind us in a corridor and speaking only when we did. "Do not answer," Jay said. "I won't," I said, but I wanted to. Curiosity sits close to obedience in the brain. We reached a clearing banded by tape bleached colorless. On a flat rock sat a plastic cooler with its lid cracked and a power bank scarred by heat. Next to them, a Bluetooth speaker taped over with white cloth. The cloth smelled of resin and fish meal. Sun crouched, gloved, and tilted the speaker. It had a micro-SD card taped to the base. Jay scanned the trees while she worked. Miho stood behind me, camera up, lens edge trembling. The speaker crackled. A woman's voice, recorded too clean for the woods. "Yogio." Then softer, urgent, a child's. "Iyama." A pause long enough to register as a breath. Then stones clicked. Soyeon killed the device. "Bait," she said. "Scare the casual hikers. Keep them to the main paths." She glanced at the cooler. "Maybe more than scare." "Drugs?" I asked. "Or mushrooms," Jay said. "Or nothing. Sometimes fear alone is currency." A branch snapped downslope. Not the neat crack of something stepping and stopping, but a chain of snaps like a body shifting through multiple points of contact. Too large for a fox. Too heavy for a raccoon dog. Jay raised his headlamp into a lattice of branches. Silver flashed deep in the trees. A rectangle, then another, as if two mirror fragments were turning. Miho fired the shutter. The sound slapped the clearing. Silence answered. Then a rock rattled against another rock, thrown, not fallen. It struck the tape post and toppled it. We backed into a triangle, backpacks outward, our fronts facing the dark. Fear scales things accurately. You know when you're outranged. The thing rattled the brush again, closer. I could hear fabric scratch and a breath that wasn't wind. Jay dropped low, grabbed the cooler like a shield, and dragged it toward us. "We leave," he said. "We leave now." But Soyeon pointed to the trees. Her mouth formed one word. "Wait." Because the breath had changed. It now came from upslope, where nothing had moved. From behind, too. From both directions at once. Then the clicking started again, behind us and to our right, and far below, layered like bad audio in a cheap horror film. Except this wasn't a film. It was a hill and some trees and the lights of a city we could still see if we turned our backs on the sound. Multiple speakers, I whispered. Or one person with multiple devices, Soyeon said. And a friend throwing stones. Jay set the cooler down and pulled an orange flare from his pack. We're ending the game. He cracked it. Fire poured into the clearing, guttering red. For an instant the pines were ribs and the rock was meat, and something white slid behind a trunk. Tall, wrong, with a long curve trailing behind like a rope. Miho's breath broke. He took one step after it, as if a tether pulled him. Sun seized his sleeve. "No," she said it with all the authority of a librarian telling you not to dog-ear a page. Calm and absolute. The flare hissed. The breath stopped. The clicking stopped. The forest went back to being a forest. Only now I knew it could be other things if asked properly. We left the speaker, took the card, and moved fast. The trail kinked into a service road that curled around a terraced slope scratched with bamboo. The flare's burn dwindled behind us, turning the trunks to black bars again. A damp smell rose off the ground, metallic under the pine. My recorder kept catching noise I couldn't sort, a faint shivering like distant wires, the soft cluck of wood hitting wood, Miho's breathing too high. "Talk to me," I said to him as we walked. "Anchor yourself. What did you see?" "Fabric," he said. "White, draped. But it didn't move like a person. It bent wrong when it turned. Like it hinged at the ribs." "Synthetic gilly," Jay said. "Or just a painter's suit." "Or nothing," Soyeon added. "We are good at drawing lines between unrelated dots when we're scared." At the next bend, a sign in Hangul warned hikers to stay on marked paths. Someone had written below it in charcoal, "Whoa," and drawn 9 short strokes like tails. Soyeon rubbed the marks with the heel of her glove and smudged them into a grey cloud. For the first time since Halmiani's kitchen, she looked unsettled. "The 9 tails belong to the Gumiho," she said. "But Jangsanbeom is its own thing. Mixing them is either play, or someone who learned their monster from TikTok." We cut into a narrow spur that Soyeon said led past an old listening post. The road became a path, and the path narrowed to a boot-width ribbon hugging a steep drop choked in dead bamboo. I kept my body against the hill. Jay scouted a short way ahead, the triangle of his lamp flicking. Miho walked behind me again. When the wind came, the bamboo knocked their dry knuckles together. It sounded like 100 people politely asking for attention. The listening post was a squat concrete room half swallowed by dirt, its window square a mouth of night. Jay tested the rusted door. It flexed and groaned. Inside, our lights lay across peeling paint, a stove, a grated hatch locked with a chain that had eaten its own iron. On a shelf sat an empty ramen cup and a used hand warmer. Below the shelf lay a makeshift shrine, 2 bottle caps, a strip of white cloth, and a nail driven upright through a coin. Soyeon crouched. "Somebody's been here recently." The recorder hissed in my pocket. I pulled it out. The levels rose and fell as if something were breathing on the mic from very close. I looked up. No one stood near me. It took me 1 heartbeat too long to realize the breathing matched mine. Not quite. The pattern kept pace, but the pause at the end was a fraction too long, like an answer waiting for a question you hadn't asked. "That's the wind," I said. Miho shook his head. "The wind doesn't wait." We heard steps outside. Not stealthy. Not rushed. Measured, as if someone wanted us to know they were there and that they weren't in a hurry. Jay signaled lights out. Darkness filled the room like water, pressing against our faces. The steps reached the door and stopped. Something brushed the metal, faint and sticky, like tape peeling. Then, soft as an apology, there came 3 taps. Wood on metal. A pause. 3 more. Jay's hand found mine and pressed the flare into it. If the door moves, light it. I counted under my breath. 2, 4, 8. The taps didn't return. Instead, a whisper touched the hatch grate, too thin to catch, then lengthened into a single drawn breath that sounded a lot like a person pretending not to be a person. When it ceased, the bamboo clacked again, and the steps receded, not down the path but into the bamboo itself, into the steep, brittle tangle no sane person would choose. We waited a long time. When we came out the door, the path glittered with a trail of crushed glass, fresh, so fresh the pieces hadn't shaken down between the stones. They ceased at the bend. On the slope beyond, a pale strip lay snagged on a stump. Miho reached for it. Jay stopped him and used the trekking pole to lift the strip. The cloth had hooks stitched into it, the kind you find on reenactment costumes. The hooks were smeared with resin and something that smelled sharp and animal and wrong. "Lure cloth," Jay said. "Resin for scent. Hooks to hang on bark and make it look like fur caught on trees." "So it is a person," I said. Jay was quiet. "At least one. And if there's one," Soyan said, "there's a group. Somebody's trying to keep these slopes empty. It's easier to operate in silence." "Poachers?" I asked. "Poachers don't usually layer the theater," she said. That felt like a play. Outside the bamboo, the road widened. A small van sat nose in behind a thicket, covered by a tarp the wind hadn't quite pinned. Dust masked the plates. The rear door's lock was gone, snapped metal glittering on the ground. Inside, empty crates, a shovel, a box of white disposable suits, and a crate of external speakers with labels in Korean and English. There were also zip ties and a coil of paracord. In the front cup holder, a paper talisman with 9 tails drawn in quick strokes. The talisman's ink had bled. Miho took a photo and lowered the camera very slowly. "I don't think this is a ghost story anymore. Folklore is a mask," Soyeon said. "It shows what the wearer wants us to see. The question is why." Jay killed the van's dome light and closed the door without latching it. "We leave this as we found it," he said. "We call it in when we get reception." But reception didn't come. Our phones showed ghost bars. One, then none. The path back toward the ridge felt longer than before, like the mountain had shifted its furniture while we were inside. Somewhere behind us, the clicking returned, patient, amused. We did not run. Running tells a hunter you know your prey. We reached a wooden pavilion overlooking the lights, the kind where couples share convenience store beer in summer. The bench smelled faintly of gasoline. Below, through the black weave of trunks, a cone of light moved across the slope, too steady for a headlamp. Another cone answered it. The cones didn't bob. They slid. The speakers began again, closer. Woman, child, stones, and from farther down came a different sound, high and thin, like air squeaking through a toy. That was new. That worried me. Jay took the flare back and passed me a penlight. "If they mean to herd us, they'll do it toward the old stairs," he said. "Narrow, easy to block. And if they mean to show us a miracle," Miho said, "then we decline." We cut left into a darker spur. The sound followed. It was careful. The careful part made me more afraid than the noise itself. We reached the stairs. Concrete poured long ago, half-eaten, thin ice on the edges like spun sugar. Down in the ravine, another flare burned to life, green this time. It painted the trunks a hospital color. A figure in white crossed the light, not running, not walking either, gliding on an incline that should have required steps. The head turned and reflected our lamps with 2 silver coins. "Reflective tape," Soyeon said. "On goggles. Or a face shield." She sounded like she was grading a paper written to frighten her. The figure stopped at a stump and bent. A moment later, the high thin squeal came again. Jay lifted his lamp. A steel cable ran from the stump into the brush, thrumming. The sound was cable singing. "Traps for animals," he said. "Or for us. Either way." The figure straightened and tapped the stump with something that clicked like antlers. I aimed my recorder at the sound and let it drink. "Enough," Jay said, and cracked the second flare. The red light cut the dark. Somewhere above, a man shouted, not the legend's whisper but a real voice, pissed off and too close to civilized. "Yeah. Yogi Ania. Not here." The shout cut off, swallowed by bamboo. The figure moved at last, not away from us but sideways, maintaining the angle that kept him half seen, the way you hold a mask to conceal your actual face. He carried something long, staff or pole. When he lifted it, I saw the cloth hooks glint. He tapped a tree and left a strand behind, a streamer of white that whispered in the wind. Miho, who had not said a word for minutes, suddenly took a picture and another, climbing the stairs toward the angle that would show the figure head-on. Soyeon grabbed him. He shook her off and went 3 steps farther. "I have to know," he said, not loud, not to us, maybe not to anyone alive. A rock pinged off the stair rail, sparking. Jay stepped in front of Miho and raised the flare high. Red flame splashed over white. In the light, the figure became a man in a disposable suit with tape across the visor, paracord around the waist, hooks rattling from his belt like charms. For a beat the theater died. We saw him. He saw us. His mouth was bare beneath the shield. He was 25 or 40. He could have worked at a cafe. Then someone behind us threw a handful of gravel hard enough to sting skin. Another person, upslope, mimicked a child's crying too well. A third person clicked stones in a rhythm that made my scalp tighten. It wasn't one man. It had never been one man. The mountain had a cast and a crew. Soyeon raised a phone and spoke clearly, naming the date and the mountain and the direction we faced, describing the suits, the cable, the speakers, the van. Her voice did what voices do. It cut a line through a thick place. The men in white stilled. For the first time I felt them calculate. If we were witnesses naming specifics into a record, they had a smaller stage to play on. We backed up the steps, slow, keeping our lamps on the white. I heard a zipping sound and realized Jay was pulling the pin on the flare gun he hadn't told us he carried. He raised it and fired. The star went up through branches and burst, a red flower. In the sudden light I saw the ravine and the cable and the men with hooks, the tape-wrapped speakers on poles, the smear of resin on a trunk. I also saw, beyond them, something white and tall step into the edge of the light, tail or rope or cloth trailing, head cocked in a way that belonged to no costume. Then the star died and the night reassembled itself with our lamps and our flares and our quick animal breathing. Sirens came late. When they did, the white thinned. We heard retreat in the brush, in the careful unspooling of cable, in the clipping of tape, in the simple logic of people who didn't want to be on the wrong end of a legal fact. The police found the van and the speakers, the suits and the hooks and the bait recordings. They said words like poaching and illegal harvesting and attempted intimidation. They took statements. Miho gave them photos of people who looked like people. We were in a convenience store by dawn, surrounded by coffee and hard-boiled eggs and high-sodium soup. Soyeon played the audio. The recordings matched what we'd heard, the clicking, the staged voices, the badly looped cry. They also caught one more thing, a breath that synchronized with mine until it didn't, a breath that paused where I didn't, waiting for an answer I hadn't given. The techs who analyzed the files later said it was bleed-through from wind, a quirk in the recorder's limiter. They might be right. 2 weeks later, back in Seoul, I heard a child crying in the alley behind my apartment. It was the city cry, the tantrum, the fake-out. I looked. No one stood there. A plastic bag skittered. A cat peered from a stair. The wind scribed the railing with a soft metal note. I went inside and tried to write the ending. My phone buzzed. A file from Miho, a still pulled from the flare's bloom. The suits were clear, the cable sharp, the hooks mean. At the edge of the light, motion blur turned a strip of cloth into something like a tail. You could say that. You could also say it was just cloth and light. His message said only, "Do you hear it now?" That night, my radiator giggled like a child. The pipes clicked. I listened and did not answer. And from somewhere like a stairwell 3 buildings over, a voice I could explain a dozen ways asked softly, patiently, as if it had all the time a legend needs, "Yogio,